Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. I'm Paul Hunter, Artistic Director of Told by an Idiot, and this is a podcast where I talk to friends and colleagues delving into what made them the person they are today. Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. And my guest this month is a regular collaborator with Told by an Idiot over the past 10 years, and she's been a vital part, I think, of changing and challenging our visual aesthetic, how our work looks and how we make it. She's endlessly curious. She's always provocative and supportive and genuinely interested in the process, which I think is, for me, is really crucial. She's a great designer and theatre maker, and she has just designed our current show, Would You Bet Against Us? Welcome, Sophia Clist.
Thank you. Hi, Paul.
Hello, Sophia. I should start. We'll come to Would You Bet Against Us a bit later on, but I want to start with it because I know you and I haven't chatted briefly since we kind of opened in the Birmingham Repertory Theatre and had a wonderful run there. But we are now halfway through our community tour of the show, which has been absolutely brilliant. In these very, as you know, you visited all the spaces, but these very particular non-theatre spaces in and around Aston Villa Football Club in Birmingham, and the audiences and the response has been absolutely wonderful. People saying how much they can relate to the story, both through the football and through me and the puppet of my dad. More of that later, puppetry later, and how funny and moving they find it. It's brilliant. But your set looks fantastic in all of the places we've been, and I thank you again for your brilliant flexibility, because sometimes we've had all of the wall, and then sometimes we've had a bit of the wall, and sometimes we've had a floor, and sometimes we haven't. But what is brilliant is it kind of works in every space we've been in. At the weekend we were at Aston Villa Academy, which was just like a kind of room really, but it kind of sits there wonderfully. So we'll come to that shortly, but I just wanted to pass that on to you. But the first thing I want to do, so far, is take you right back to your early years. Now, I might be wrong. Obviously, we've talked a lot in the past, but were your early years in the Midlands, or were they elsewhere?
Yeah, that's right. I grew up in Worcestershire.
Correct.
So yeah, in the Midlands.
And what I know, obviously, theatre came as a later thing, but I just wonder if you can tell us a bit about your first early experiences of theatre. Did you go to the theatre as a family? What sort of things did you see, or not at all?
Yeah, I have this recollection of my mother taking me and my sisters every year. We would go to London where her twin lived, and she would take us on a sort of cultural outing, which included theatre. So, for example, one piece I remember, and so this would have been in the 70s, in the very, very early 70s, I saw at the Mermaid Theatre on the
Yes.
river, yeah,
Yeah.
I saw a production of Gulliver's Travels, and there was video projection.
Wow.
I mean, really, wow, isn't it? And so, yeah, so when they'd done this amazing video projection, I can't remember any detail about it, but I just remember remembering that and thinking that's pretty out there in the 70s to have done that.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Sometimes I think we can all feel that as we make theatre, that in the time we do, that we're very much kind of the innovators of things, but lots of things have kind of happened before or existed before. And when
Yeah.
because I remember going to probably a similar time to you, but probably less, well, not less interesting, but maybe less cutting edge than the Gulliver's Travels. I remember going to a pantomime in Birmingham, and I remember a bit where an actor went out of the door, and then they filmed him running down these stairs and getting in a taxi and driving away to the airport, and then getting on a plane and arriving in. And of course, it was all filmed, but I thought that is brilliant. And my young mind went, wow, how have they done that? So yes, that is revealing. But there was no theatre in your family, or performance in your family in any way? Or?
Not performance, no. I mean, art of different sorts, but not.
What was the art of different sorts?
Well, my grandpa was an architect, and my other great grandfather was a painter. So it was kind of in there, but hadn't. And my mother was but her family were big kind of into music and playing. So
so you grew up
Yeah,
in
lots
that
of
kind
music.
of world. So what was your kind of early experiences of art then, in terms of you making stuff, or as a child, did you make things or paint things or create things? Or
I remember drawing quite a lot and making pictures and strange little things for people. Oh, and I remember making a down at the end of our garden that there was a quarry on the other side of it, like so the hill was being eaten up by this quarry, and there was a tiny quarry, like the remains of a tiny quarry, like a little sounds mad, like a little cliff, like the side, the height of a house. And I remember going and making a crocodile out of bits of rock with my little sister and giving it to my father for his, so that the sculptor in me was.
how old were you then?
I was probably, well, she would have been, I was probably about 10, maybe 10 or
Oh,
11,
and
like
that was
picking found shapes, So yeah, that's quite,
that
now I
is
think
quite
about
a,
it, it's quite
because
interesting.
I can, you think of kids drawing something, but to actually go and create that from something physical, it's quite a. And did you know? Had you seen sculpture? At that point, or
I wouldn't think, no, and I've got no recollection then, so it was very intuitive. I guess it was very intuitive. Yeah,
ah.
just to do that.
So, what about at school? Was art very important to you at school, or did it become important to you at school?
It was, I was always very much into. I was a bit of a annoying all rounder sort of person, but art was one of my favourite subjects, and we did life drawing, which was
Wow.
really extraordinary. Not, I hasten to add, no naked bodies, no, but the actual, drawing from the figure.
Yeah.
So that was quite something that to have that as a teenager.
And a particular
Yeah.
teacher inspire you, or?
Yeah, my art teacher looked like there's a very famous painting called the Betrothal of Arnold Feeney, and my art teacher looked like the man. We always used to say, "It's Mr. Barnes," in the paint as he was showing it to us in our art history at A level.
Well,
It's like
that's
he's in the painting.
on a side note. I always wondered who Arnold Feeney was, because there's a venue in Brighton called the Arnold Feeney, which was a kind of arty experimental venue, and it was Arnold Feeney an actual person then?
Oh God, yes, but I mean, don't ask me for any more detail. I'd have to look it up all
No,
over again.
no.
But it's in
We
Gombrick's Story of Art, the Bible of
yes,
art
yeah.
history at that
He must
time.
be somebody, because I remember that name always intrigued me in Brighton. I thought, why is that
Right.
venue called the Arnold Feeney? I will get our team of brilliant researchers and producers to look that up, so
Yeah, absolutely.
that can be noted.
But he
And
tried
then
to put me off going to art school. He said art. He said art is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration.
okay. I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? As we'll come to this as well, the fact that you and I are still doing something like this, as what we do, and it's interesting. Well, it's interesting. I like to figure that percentage being slightly different, but it's interesting
Yeah.
of looking at it like that. But so you obviously went through school. You did A levels. Did you go straight to art school or to university? How did all that work?
I went to art school in Exeter. Well, I went local. You generally visual art training. Do a foundation course
Yeah.
first, because you know nothing. You've learned nothing, very little, in any kind of art at school. And then I went on to do a fine art degree at Exeter College of Art, which no longer exists. It's part of Plymouth now, Plymouth Uni. An open fine art course which incorporated all sorts of painting and sculpture and printmaking, photography, film, video, kind of performance, live art sort of
Yeah.
thing. But I fell straight into sculpture, and that was, I think, that the making of that crocodile
Stayed with you,
a
exactly.
very three-dimensional brain, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
that's clear to me, and brilliant for our work. But that's interesting. So, and what's that? Is that 3 years, 2 years?
3 years, yeah.
Okay.
So 4 years, yeah, 4 years. Because of the foundation as well.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I touch on this in our autobiographical show, Would You Bet Against Us? My mother, in particular, slight reluctance towards me entering the world of show business. What was the reaction of your family to going to art school? Presumably, people had been there before, so it was a bit more. There was a context for it.
You'd think so, but no, they were. I think they were a bit horrified
Okay.
because I was also quite academic, apparently.
Ah, right.
So they expected me. I did languages. So I was one minute I was thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to go and do French and Spanish at university, and
Yeah.
unfortunately I didn't get. My estimates weren't good enough, thank God. And then I decided I wanted to go to art school, and they were. There was a kind of like, ah,
No,
right,
we weren't hoping for that sort of
yeah.
outcome.
No, or that promises to be really difficult, kind of.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Fear.
And when you were at art school, um, with doing the fine art thing, did you encounter? You talked about performance art more, but you didn't encounter any kind of theatre design in a formal way at all. That wasn't part of what you were doing.
No, not at all, not at all. And I think I was very locked into. I don't think I got very far when I was actually at college. It took me a long time to kind of get away from my narrow, school education and background in a sense, and get a bit looser and more creative. So I didn't. I mean, for example, I was studying near Dartington. I didn't even know of Dartington's existence. If I had, maybe no, I'd probably been too terrified.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no, I didn't discover performance at all.
Uh,
That came very much later.
but it's interesting when you say about that thing of the kind of the confines of an education one has had, and then arriving at a place that hopefully is quite creative, like your art school or me at Middlesex Poly. I think some of the biggest thing for me was about meeting people who thought differently or had very different lives, and I'm sure it's the same for lots of people when they go away to university or whatever. But it was meeting people like Haley who felt very different to me, and being taught by John that made me go, oh, okay, then. And it released something in me, but also opened my mind a bit more. And have you still got friends from those days at art school?
I don't, which is, oh no, hang on a minute. I've got a couple of people. No, I'm not really in touch with people from art school.
Everyone just kind of went there different
No,
ways.
yeah, and I think that's a reflection on. I mean, I think it took me on the beginning of a journey of exploding the world as I knew it, which was, quite in a way quite confined and very very, I don't know, I don't know what I'm saying.
I know that.
But I think yeah, it's like for me it was a slow burn journey, if you like. I think to really find my creativity. For example, when I was at art school, the kind of work I made was very figurative, which was considered very traditional, and I realised only when I'd left that I did something. I did something which I think I was asked to do a slideshow of my work, and I did it, and I suddenly saw it all unfolding in front of me, and realised that I was interested in creating environments for people to occupy, not the actual people. And that was the moment where everything kind of exploded into something more interesting. And so consequently, making theatre or in my own work, tending to make installations that people actually
Inhabited.
enter and
Yeah.
inhabit and take,
Yeah.
and yeah.
That's
So
interesting because obviously I at my first encounter with you and your work was some of the wonderful, wonderful shows you did for Theatre Rights. And I think one of the things that I always loved about it was the fact that it didn't appear like conventional theatre design. Do you know what I mean? Even before I met you, got to know you, it didn't feel like it came from a necessarily formal theatre design background. You know what I mean? It had a playfulness and a sense of, like you say, of people inhabiting that world, which obviously we'd always, even when we'd worked with our long time previous collaborator Naomi Wilkinson, in a different way, Naomi also had that sense of creating habitats for us to be in, and people enabling us to play and provoke us. So how did you first what was your first kind of performative piece that you did in a sense? I won't say theatre, but whatever. What was the first time you did something where was with your work?
Um, well, in my own independent work rather than in, I think it was clear. Working in theatre, and Penny Bernand, who founded Theatre Rights, she came from her background was in fine art, as was Naomi's.
Yes.
And Theatre Rights deliberately worked with people who didn't come from a theatre making practice necessarily. And it had a huge impact on what I did in the studio, because I was bored rigid of making this figurative work. And then I suddenly found myself in spaces with people, creating objects or environments for people to occupy, but both performers and audience. And it had a huge, huge impact on my own work. And I made a piece which I still return to, called Stretch, which is like a wall of elastic that makes sound when you touch it. And that so you could encounter it in a space and bring it to life because you touch it and it responds to you, which was the concept at the heart of it when I first made it in my studio. But also a performer can perform in it, and the audience ends up sort of performing in it, and then we use it for workshops and stuff. So yeah, it had absolutely seismic influence working in theatre.
Well, it's interesting because obviously you've done, I'll talk about some of the shows that we've done together shortly, but you've not only worked with us, you've worked with some of the kind of leading theatre makers, Emma Rice, Improbable, Theatre Rights. Is there any point, and this might be more of a question about some of the things that are asked of designers within a theatre context, you know, some of the practical things that are asked. Have you ever had any moments when you've been in a kind of production meeting or making things where you think, oh, I regret not doing any kind of formal theatre design training, or has it never crossed your mind? You thought, I am what I am?
No, I mean, I every time because I actually don't get. I have worked with some brilliant theatre makers, yourselves included, and I feel incredibly lucky. But every time I do it, because it's not I'm not working all the time making theatres. Every time I do it, I feel like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I don't know any of the rules, and I forget terms. So I'll be there kind of going, it's not just an age thing. It's like, I've forgotten what that's called. So yeah, I feel almost wholly unqualified. And then I kind of catch myself, do a bit of deep breathing, and I think, you know what you're doing. Come on.
I think
Stop
that's,
making, and trust you. And I think I'm very instinctive, and I need to trust that. And we've had conversations about that kind of.
I can really relate to that. I can really relate to that because you know this. I passionately believe that changing your mind, not knowing where you're heading, can be a really confident place to be. And we equate it too often with thinking, oh, this person doesn't know what they're doing. It's not the same thing at all. I think constant inquiry and curiosity and the ability to change and not know can be a very confident place to be as well. And
absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that I think that there's an aspect of that is inherent in a fine art training, is that all you're doing all the time is creating a problem that you solve, making a piece of work that leads you to another problem. And I'm sure you would say the same thing about theatre.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. But I also have seen you, which I think is a real skill, and I think it really helps our process, is you're very good in a team, whatever that team is, whether it's a team of actors or designers, directors, whatever. But also I think the kind of hands-on nature, maybe because you make a lot of things, starting with that crocodile all those years ago. I think that hands-onness, I think, gives people confidence, particularly maybe technical teams and people who are making stuff. I think they get confidence from something like, oh, okay, she's doing it. She's here making that thing, rather than just giving instruction. Do you think there's anything in that?
Yes, yeah, I do actually, because I think that partly I need to make it clear to people, and so like working at the Rep, there's an incredibly competent team of people making. It's very visible when you're actually in a building. It's a real privilege actually to have that whole team around you.
Yeah, a lot of skill.
And they do, like, they know that I'm quite skillful, and they did seem to enjoy that rather than it be a problem. So I kind of think that is good. I mean, you can't, and then you have to be quite careful with it because I don't make all the time. So there's that balance of respecting that they really know what they're doing because they're doing it all the time. But I can have an idea and pitch it in there, and I think that being hands-on is an asset, definitely, and it helps me develop. I mean, it's how I work. I process things by trying them out, like you do on the the floors, and it's a very valuable part of how I design, I think. And I love the team thing. I mean, I really love being in the room.
No, I think that's apparent, and and as you know, it's at the heart of what we do is collaboration and a team of people. obviously your first show for us, sort of 11 years ago now, and the horse you rode in on, which was a show I'm terribly fond of when I look back on it. I think to combine a kind of level of anarchy with a kind of something that was for us quite political in a way, what we were doing. But the way you responded to recreating a strange expressionist version of the Grace Brothers department store from Are You Being Served, when two members of the Bard of Meinhof gang would come in, I sensed very early on you were a perfect designer for us, because you didn't really bat an eyelid, even if I imagine some of it wasn't necessarily on your cultural radar. You threw yourself into this 1970s sitcom with real gusto, and I think that's important, because our work very consciously switches between something that might be considered more the more I don't want to say highbrow. There is no brow, as Simon Armitage says, no brow. But we deliberately mix, whether it's, in that show we mix the work of Dario Fo or Alfred Hitchcock with Bugs Bunny, and it's a very deliberate thing that we're playing with. And I think your design did that fantastically. But a show which we still do 10 years on, and I think has been, for me, one of your most wonderful designs, was when you did Get Happy for us. And I remember saying to you, this is a show that's come out of me watching my 2-year-old son play. And I said, it's just about play. There's no story. It's just about, and it is inspired by some things like Pina Bausch, The Movement, and Charlie Chaplin, Dr. Seuss. But you were kind of brilliant in realizing an environment for the whole thing. And I remember that first time we did it at the Barbican, where the kids and the parents came through that extraordinary tunnel of silk that you'd created, and then into that extraordinary circle. And I get enormous pleasure from the fact that that is still going in China, in Luxembourg, when we do it. I just think what was your starting? I know you were in the room with us, but what was your starting point when you don't have much to start on? I didn't give you a lot to start on with that.
No, that was what was so amazing about that process, is that there was no story. So I just remember thinking, I just need something to hold on to. And I thought we decided quite early on that we wanted to do it in the round. We had a big conversation about it. It was, and that gave me. And I thought there are round things. There are round things. we're going to be in the round. The audience is going to be in the round. There's an egg sandwich. There's a paddling pool. And they were all round, and I thought, that's it. So I thought, so what else is round? So the world is round, a compass is round, a clock is round, and so I piled all these images on top of each other, and made the very first painted, the very first floor I think I'd ever designed, and painted.
That's right, because I remember saying to you in theatre terms, having in the round is my favourite configuration to make anything, and we've done some shows at the Royal Exchange in the round, and it feels to me that the floor becomes very crucial when you're in the round, in terms of what the world is and what the design is, and the focus that is thrown onto the floor, because your floor was extraordinary. The detail of the floor was amazing.
Well, I did it literally. I drew it, pen and ink, and then painted colour it. So yeah, it was absolutely a drawing that we blew up. I mean, blowing things up doesn't always work, but it certainly did in that instance. And then when it went to China, do you remember, it went from the Barbican with an audience of 120 to a theatre that could potentially seat 1,200 people? And I remember saying to you, well, nobody's, most of the audience are not actually going to see the floor, so we need to do something to take the design up into the so we ended up taking parts of the drawings up into these silks.
These amazing silks, and also that was fantastic, because it kind of tapped into something that sat very comfortably within that space. And I suppose that brings me to my next thing, is your brilliant adaptability. I mentioned the community tour, and obviously when there were certain things we wanted to do when we made Would You Bet Against It, one of which was to follow the Arts Council Green Book, which I refer to in the show itself as in a slightly comedic way, but we're very committed to that. And you brilliantly, with Jen, our producer, and the team, threw yourself into that. What was it like I never really asked you that. What was it like designing something where you're following something like that? I should say, obviously, the Green Book is, so people who are listening, it's a new initiative from the Arts Council, which is basically about sustainability, which is very important, and how can we, create things from things that exist. And but what was it like doing it? I've never really asked you. Was it really challenging, or?
Well, I didn't find it really. I just thought, as long as I never got down to the nitty gritty of exactly what we were aiming at, but it was just like, clearly we've got to get into we need to have as much of the set made of reclaimed material as possible, which it was. The whole structure for the wall was, and the floor was, and then the excitement of going into the prop store of the rep, and just finding things. You thought, oh, we needed a bench. That's it. That's the perfect example. We needed a bench to be the subs bench, and I found this really kind of very fancy gilt-legged, velvet-covered bench, and I thought, I'll just try that on Paul. Sent you a picture. Love it. It's like, yes.
Perfect. And also,
it was like accidental aesthetic emerged, and that amazing chair. So
yeah,
and it
chair
all
is
had
brilliant.
this very royal,
Yeah, no, and I think I always loved what you brought in, because it captured the kind of juxtaposition that was going on in the piece as well. So it reflected that. If you were, because obviously this is going to be something which remains, and it's a very good thing, and more people will do it. What would be your tips to a designer who was designing something from the Green Book for the first time like you did? If you were going to give any tips to a younger designer who's suddenly going down that route, what would you say?
I think that the thing that really stuck with me is that it surprised me how, you could look at it as being quite confining, but actually it kept me on my creative toes, because you ended up finding yourself making a choice that you weren't necessarily 100% sure of, and then suddenly it reached into something else. It provided another idea that you weren't even thinking about. Like, we had this, I referred to it as the three-piece suite, because we had the chair, and what was the third thing? We had the chair and the piano stool eventually.
Yes. Yeah.
And the subs bench, and they were this sort of marvelous three-piece suite, very smart, very, very smart. So I think it's surprising what it can give you. There's no such thing as a limitation. Well, we all know that limitations are actually
exactly. Restriction is a good thing.
Restriction is a good thing. It makes you think harder.
I think that was I totally agree. I mean, all of our work comes out of some form of restriction, and I think that's all it is in a sense. And when you embrace that restriction, it's going to come up with something interesting, isn't it? What about the you have a design which is wonderful, and then we go, okay, we're now going to try and fit it into these community centres, which require. I suppose you were always wonderfully unprecious about it. There was always a sense that there was not, which is not to be confused with going, well, I don't mind what you do. I just mean there was a sense where you were. It felt to me you were always up for the challenge and going, okay, what can we do to it? But how did that feel? Your step going in and. Well, is this bit fit or that bit fit? Or?
I think, if I could choose, it's a bit like get happy. I've told you, I miss
yes,
the store, because if you haven't got your set, then you have your aesthetic is still in there, but a lot of what you've done is taken away. But then that reflects how the work still stands up, and I laughingly, slightly fearfully joke now that the first thing that will go from making theatre is the set. In these hard times, I really I think
that's an interesting question you raised, Sophia. I think, because my sadness in the times that we're in is when times are hard, is the visual aesthetic. You're right, is often something that gets reduced. So you end up with something where you go, well, actually, this is just the performer in a space now, and I think that's something that we have to fight for. Even though I might sound contradictory that I'm saying, we have to embrace the space that is. People often say to us, "Oh, how did you find all of that extraordinary physical language in your shows on when you're on the set? And I go, well, because we've collaborated from the designer at the earliest point in the process, and the set has been in the room with us for 6 weeks. If we get it for our technical rehearsal, then we'll just end up standing in front of it. But if we have it in the room, and I think you're right, it is a concern, but I think hopefully there will be enough people who value design and the visual side of what they're doing, who will keep insisting on that as a crucial part of how you tell stories and make theatre.
Yeah, I hope so too. But I also think it just causes it to transform. And in fact, where I started working with theatrites, a lot of the stuff that I designed were objects that transformed in front of your eyes. So I like creating objects that move, or that open out or close, or something like that. So there's always a way. And of course, a visual aesthetic is really important even if you haven't got a set in the room, or the space, or outside. If there isn't
totally
a visual
agree.
aesthetic.
And also, I think maybe that's also something that drew me to you, and remains something that I love collaborating with, because we've always been interested in the notion of transformation in the biggest sense, whatever that means. We're constantly transforming through what we do, through what we touch, through what we hold, through what we're on, and I think that enables you, hopefully, to inhabit worlds that are really unpredictable, surprising, and I think you're brilliant at that, and that passion for that sort of transformation, beginning with, as I think, with the crocodile in the quarry, as long may it continue. Sophia, thank you so much. Now, I'm going to see you again very shortly when we meet at the Love Supreme Jazz Festival, which will be lovely. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, in the next few days. But thank you so much for joining me, Sophia, this morning, and I will see you very soon.
Thank you. You're not going to ask me these quick fire.
No, I'm not going to do any. You don't have.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, of course.
Is the thing that I most, if you'd asked me what a regret was.
Oh yeah.
I've only listened to a few of these podcasts. I think I envy artists who meet somebody who they then make work with. Like you met Hayley.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And John. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why I love being in the room, is that thing, the joy of having collaborators. And that's the thing I miss, I think, in my own creative journey, is that I didn't meet someone who I could then make something of right from the outset. I would have loved that.
That's interesting. And as you say, you love being in the room, and it's something that I really, really value, because that is chance. Me going to that particular place, somewhat reluctantly, because I didn't get into one of the established drama schools. I went somewhat reluctantly and slightly sniffily to Middlesex Polytechnic. But what did I know? And then I went there and I met Hayley and John, and my life changed. And I think I'm very, very fortunate for that to happen. So I think the best next place is regular teams of collaborators that you like, and you've always got a place at the table and in our room. And I think that's the next best thing. But no, I'm shaking up at the end of my podcast, so I don't want to get too predictable. But Sophia, thank you so much. I'll see you in a week or so. Take care.
Thank you. See you then. Bye.
Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this idiot podcast, please spread the word